what was the inspiration behind Utu? Or just tell us a little bit about Utu, how it came about, and why even the name Utu in the first place.
Sure. So I usually tell this story. There's kind of two different ways we can tell it, but I'll just ask a very basic question, which is, who do you trust? I bet you're all thinking something like, I trust myself, I trust my family, I trust my friends. Okay, some of my friends, sometimes for some things. Most people in the world tend to trust like this. And then we looked at the trust systems of the internet and we thought, why is it that all of the mechanisms for trust on the internet have absolutely nothing to do with how we trust in real life? So on the internet, you're asked to trust something like 5 random people that you've never met, that you have nothing in common with, that probably don't share your values, your beliefs. And by the way, they may not even be real people. Maybe they're bots or paid reviews, but I don't know. According to those 5 people, this babysitter has 5 stars on the babysitter app, or this taxi has 5 stars on the taxi app. It's like, okay, so what? Well, let me ask a different question. Like, what if you went to that same babysitter app and that same babysitter has 50 5-star ratings from 50 random people and 1 1-star rating from your sister? Will you hire her or him? Probably not. Everybody says they'll trust their sister. So I'll ask another question like, well, what if it's 500 really good reviews from 500 random people, 1 bad one from your sister? People say, no, I still trust my sister. So the idea is that there's no amount of overwhelming, like aggregated, averaged, anonymous data points or validations that can be more valuable to a person than 1 data point if it's the right data point from the right person at the right place at the right time about the right thing. And this is essentially what Utu was born to do, to try to bridge the gap between how people trust in real life based on relationships and how we're asked to trust online, which is really transactional up till now. So that's, you can probably tell from that, the name Utu fits really well in the sense that our concept of trust is not about a document or a credential, but about who you are in relation to everybody else as a part of humanity. And I guess you could say the origin story is that it was born out of Maramoja, the taxi app. So we started that business when we were, again, the first taxi app on the continent. Uber was back in like maybe 5-6 cities in the US. And they made this assumption in their business model that all taxis are the same. They're a commodity. You don't care which driver you get. And I showed up in Nairobi and started showing people prototypes of the app. And they'd say, well, why would I use your app? I have my guy. Well, what do you mean? Oh, yeah, my guy, Benson. Anytime I need a ride, I call Benson. And he's always there for me. Oh, okay, well, what if he's busy? Oh, well, then he sends me his guy, Patrick, or his other guy, Simon. But I'll always get someone I trust from him. Oh, well, what if he doesn't answer the phone? Oh, well, then I call my sister and she sends me her guy and he's called Patrick. Oh, so we realized there was this need for trust, that a taxi here was not necessarily a commodity. It wasn't just about the fastest. It was about the best fit, someone that you trusted. So we redesigned the taxi app from the ground up for a place like Nairobi. And it turned out we hit a chord, and a lot of places in the world actually tend to think like this about trust being a really important factor in selecting a taxi. And then from there, we started to realize when people kind of reached out to us saying, hey, we run an app for doctors or for housekeepers or for nannies or for lending, for finance, for babysitters, for dating, for online gaming, you name it, saying we have a problem with trust and we need your trust infrastructure too. So that was kind of the birth of Utu. Something to add?
Right.
No, not really.
All right. I think, I think Bastian will come on a bit later. But I think I like that idea of trying to revolutionize the way we view trust online. And maybe you can tell us right now what's broken about the internet that you feel Utu will fix.
Sure. Let me narrow down from what's broken about the internet, because that's a long list, to what's broken about digital trust. And I would argue that there's three main problems that we have kind of come to observe over the last 7 years that we're working and thinking about this quite a lot. So, okay, at high level, there's a problem with the current theory of trust online. There's a problem with the distribution mechanisms of digital trust. And there's an economic incentives problem around digital trust. So let's start with the theory of trust. What's wrong with it? So have you ever thought to yourself, I need a babysitter. Let me hire that person. She's a 7.6 trustable person with a confidence interval of 80%. Probably not. You thought, oh, my friend or my brother has a kid the same age as me and recommends this babysitter. So there's a switch from a universal metric, like to score a babysitter against some predetermined algorithm that says we have the recipe for trust and it applies to everybody, versus evaluating suppliers and consumers dynamically against each other and trying to understand best fit rather than just highest rating. So this idea of personalized trust rather than a universal kind of prescriptive model. So we shift from prescriptive trust to descriptive trust, if that makes any sense. So we won't turn you into a number. We'll say something like, you may prefer this babysitter for the following 3, 4, 5 reasons because of this person who had this experience. And we may give you some different ways to understand that, like badges or video testimonials or token endorsements about that service, but it's all descriptive. The second problem is the mechanism. So trust is infrastructure. It's not a product. Yet most trust companies, say TripAdvisor, Yelp, things like this, they're delivering trust as a product, as a consumer-facing platform. And you've never thought to yourself, let me go to the store and buy trust. You think, I need to hire a plumber, and I sure hope I can trust that he can be in my house unsupervised or something like this. So it's a grease that makes a transaction go smoother. It needs to be baked into platforms as infrastructure, not separately as a consumer platform. Even all of the fraud and manipulation that we know about in digital trust is a symptom of trust as a product. Right? If I can go on Yelp and create one account, I can create 1,000 accounts, build a bot army, and manipulate the ratings of anything I want, right? And they might have some algorithms or some mechanisms in place to try to protect it, but it's a constant battle. So we move trust from a consumer platform to an infrastructure delivered via API directly into platforms, delivered via Oracle, directly to decentralized apps. This idea that trust must be infrastructure. And then the third core bit is, right now, all of the economic incentives around digital trust are for perverse things, right? Like if I'm an Amazon seller, I can go buy 10,000 fake reviews and maybe it costs me $50,000. And the guy who sold me those fake reviews is happy, and I'm happy when my product starts moving. All I've done is manipulate trust and profit along the way. Meanwhile, there's no consolation prize for the person who behaves honestly. So we wanted to tackle this with the token model by trying to tokenize trust and not allow people to be able to buy trust. You shouldn't be able to buy recommendations or reputation, but you should be able to earn money by being a good actor and by building digital trust, facilitating good outcomes for other people. Sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but
yeah, it's okay. I think that gives some good context from where you're coming from. And now I know that you've been leveraging AI in all of this, AI and blockchain. Maybe you can give us an insight on how you're leveraging AI in all of this, in building this trust engine.
Yeah, sure. So as Jason said, we are not actually trying to compute who is universally trustable over all persons, but rather we try to basically understand people's and their preferences and their context, and then delivering the right information to them at the right time. So this fact that you would trust your sister when choosing a babysitter more than basically anybody else is something that we try to figure out, or rather we build the algorithms that try to figure that fact out and say, okay, this is a babysitter app, so personal, intimate, private relationships are especially important for trust in this context. That's maybe versus the taxi app, where when you go on a business trip and you just want, a smooth driver that keeps their car very clean and in a good shape, so you make a good impression when you arrive at your business meeting, then maybe you will trust your colleagues more and less your sister. So this is the kind of thing that our algorithms try to identify, like what's the context, who's the person, what is this request for, and what is important therefore, and then try to figure out, okay, who are the most relevant people that have given feedback about any of the options that you have at that point. So basically the algorithms try to understand each individual with their preferences in a certain context. And that's how we mostly apply AI. Then there are some special use cases where it goes a bit more, like for example, we are supporting some fintechs and offering something like credit scoring, but it's in fact more extensive than that, because we also again look at the relationships between people. So the common thing among all these things is that we are always considering the social network of people as far as we know it, and building on these relationships. So there's not only things like machine learning to identify a matching context, there's also graph algorithms, clustering, similarity matrices, things like that. Each for different things and for different use cases. At the moment, we are building more or less specific support for use cases, onboarding one use case type after the other. Ultimately, we hope to identify enough commonalities among different use cases or different sectors so that we can build a more universal learning system, or sort of a meta learning. So a meta learning means that, okay, the system itself figures out, okay, this new client is in this kind of use case, and this use case is similar to that other use case that we support. So you can basically apply the same set of algorithms. And that's the one thing on the AI side. The blockchain side came on a bit later conceptually for us. So 2 years ago we were thinking, like, okay, we are building a trust system or a trust infrastructure system, and blockchains are basically about trustlessness and decentralization. So it must work together somehow. And the thing is, even though we are saying that we are not really trying to tell you how much somebody is objectively trustable, but rather serving you some information that you subjectively might find most important in that situation. It's still the case that we could make something up, right? So we could say that your sister doesn't trust this babysitter, but maybe we lie and we just have a problem with this babysitter. So we just say your sister doesn't trust it. And if you don't actually go to the trouble of calling your sister and ask her, then we could tell you anything. So using a blockchain can basically solve that problem. So instead of we just saving this fact that your sister gave some feedback about a babysitter just in our internal databases that are not public, we can put that transaction on a blockchain and then make it verifiable basically for everybody, or rather for people who know where to look. So if it's your sister, then probably you know her account or address. And so if it's on the blockchain, you can then go there and check that that transaction actually exists. Yes, your sister actually does not trust this babysitter. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that obviously to learn all this kind of stuff, to learn about people's preferences, about all these different contexts and how it fits in a situation and all that, we need really a lot of data. And as long as we control our own app, like in the Maramoja case, we can control what kind of data we are trying to get from people. And we have control over the app, so we can just build it in a way that enables us to do what we need to do and get the data that we need. But that's, of course, not universally the case if we are now selling this infrastructure to other use cases. So we need basically an incentivization for people to provide us data, feedback data about their preferences, about specific transactions, like, okay, you did this booking, was it good or not? So we need to learn this stuff, and we don't assume that people just want to give us this data, particularly nowadays where people are especially careful about providing data to platforms. So we devise a model where basically we give people complete control over the data that they provide, and they can change at any time who's allowed to use that data, and also charge some fee for it, possibly, like say, okay, the Utu's trust algorithm might use this data, but every time it is used, they earn some small amount of tokens, basically from us, or from the system rather. And that's the other component of that chain. And then, there's this whole token economic model. Maybe we can get to that a bit later.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so just before we get into the token model and the tokenomics, and because I know you just recently launched the Utu token, but before we get there, I mean, Bastian, you've had years of experience in AI, and I mean, listening to you talk about AI, it sounds like AI has huge potential. It's going to change a lot of things. Maybe you can break down for us a simplified explanation of what AI really is and what it's really capable of doing.
Yeah, sure. My favorite question. So, I mean, the short answer is nobody really knows, because so far we have built some systems that look intelligent in some ways, and possibly they are intelligent in some ways. So that depends then on how you define intelligence exactly. But I would claim that most people, or most non-AI, non-technical people, define intelligence vaguely as somewhat human-like intelligence. Like you have some actor that has some knowledge and some motivations, and then figures out how to do certain things. And that's actually not what current AI systems are able to do. So the machine learning advances that we have seen, and the deep learning stuff and all that, that's basically statistics at the end of the day. And it's very cleverly applied statistics. So we can build systems that can identify with high likelihood, like diagnosis, medical diagnosis, face recognition, all these things. But the thing is, these systems don't actually know what they are doing. Okay, so the latest example is GPT-3, and it has been applied to produce some impressive texts, well, some people claim it can produce literature, others think that it's not so great, but at least it's some text that can be discussed, whether it's literature or not. So that's a clear advance from previous.
Yeah. Some people say AI can write poems as well. How true is that?
Yeah. I mean, some people say that, as I said. So, and some people say it's bullshit. But okay. But there's also other instances where GPT-3 has been used to produce some user interfaces, some simple apps based on a description, and that's also pretty impressive. But the thing is that, as I said, the system, even GPT-3, does not, at the end of the day, know really what it's talking about. It doesn't have logic. It doesn't have a model for cause or causation. So if you apply it for things where the consequences might be dire, like okay, I don't know, like there's the police is, for example, applying AI systems to try to predict criminal activity, then maybe the system says, okay, this particular person is highly likely to commit a crime in like the next couple of days, but it can't tell you why that is, and you can't look into it and figure out what are the rules that led to this conclusion. It's simply a statement, and there's no explanation for it. And that's still a huge problem for machine learning. These kind of, let me be more specific and say neural network-based machine learning and similar techniques. There are other machine learning techniques which have not had such great advances, but which are actually better in explaining stuff like Bayesian logic, for example, and things like that. So yeah, so I think the hype around deep learning and stuff is a bit dangerous because of this. And there's, I mean, now the discussion is getting bigger around biases and other problems with these systems. So that I think, yeah, there's a lot to do. And I mean, there have been other approaches in AI. So Bayesian is one thing, logic generally, but these have all sort of disappointed in the past. I mean, there was a lot of promise for these kind of systems, and then they didn't deliver. And then nowadays, yeah, people are generally skeptical that they can be applied on a large scale, or logic is too, yeah, it's too difficult to put in all the rules. And the systems that have existed where people tried that on a large scale, like Psych, didn't really get where it was promised they would get. And so it's a bit difficult, but I think in the future, we need to combine these systems. They're also called System 1 and System 2. So one is logic and the other is, yeah, basically neural network like reasoning, or not reasoning, but yeah, you know, just categorization of stuff without rules or without explanation.
All right. I mean, it's I mean, we hear and we see a lot of concern around AI. I mean, when you hear somebody like Elon Musk talk about AI, you know, he's talking about this period or a time in future where AI will be smarter than human beings. It will take over. It will be more intelligent. We've seen certain aspects of that. Can we expect AI to advance to that level? And if so, how soon? And in addition to that, how do you see just generally the AI space evolving? What can we expect to see AI capable of that right now it would be unbelievable, for example?
Well, I'm not the one for making such predictions, really.
I am.
Okay. Nah, I mean, the thing with people like Elon Musk or Jason is that they are cool because they're enthusiastic and they're picking stuff up and building things and building things when nobody believes they can be built and stuff. So I would probably not have set out to build this trust mechanism without someone like him, because I might have an idea of how to go about it technically, but I wouldn't have had an idea of how to actually, you know, yeah, build an ecosystem, a company, find use cases that we can actually start on that works, and not just, you know, okay, let's take a couple of researchers and 20 years of research time and a huge budget, and hopefully something comes out at the end of the day, which is more like the academic approach, which is where I was coming from. So yeah, but the thing is that, yeah, the people who really understand how the AI works are generally more skeptical or less about the hype, let's say. So I'm a big fan of people like Gary Marcus or Julia Pearl, who are basically more like on the logical side of things and arguing that, okay, machine learning is great for some things, but well, don't believe the hype. Yeah, as I just said, there are certain things necessary in my opinion, really advance AI in the sense that, okay, it can really understand something, like understand as we think of understanding, like, okay, you're consciously thinking about it. And consciousness, for example, is something that we still don't know actually what it actually is technically, and if we can build it, and if we could build it, how. And yeah, there's just a lot of questions. And historically, yeah, if people try to make predictions how long it takes to solve some of the larger AI problems, that always went wrong. So I could say 10 years or I could say 50 years, and both would have kind of an equal chance of success, I think. But it could also take longer, or maybe we even never really figure it out. That's a possibility too. But I think there's also a difference between yeah, expecting or trying to build some human-like AI for I mean, of course, I find it fascinating. Yeah? I totally love this topic, but if it's more about, okay, how will AI change the world, then it will change the world as it has done over the last 40 years, basically, which is that, okay, we don't build conscious AI or don't build AI that can explain itself very well, but we build tools that definitely help with certain tasks and make things much more efficient. In a way, Utu's trust system is also just about efficiency, right? Because everything that we tell you, you could theoretically do without our system. If you're looking for somebody, I mean, that's what most people do right now. They call their friends and they ask, you know, an auto mechanic for Toyota, because I think you've got a Toyota yourself. And yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, I did that with a colleague of mine when I was stranded in Gong. And and our system just does that basically at a fingertip, and rather you guessing who might be the best person to call for some advice, hopefully we can just show you directly on the screen within a second who these people are and what advice they actually give. And so you are saving a lot of thought, a lot of time, a lot of calls. And so at the end of the day, it's about making things more efficient. And that's just true for a lot of AI techniques. Yeah, I mean, AI is really everywhere. If you use the narrow AI definition, just clever algorithms that can do things much faster than if you tried to do this by hand, basically. And this is something where AI will just make more contributions, things will still get faster. Yeah, now AI can beat you in Go, and tomorrow, I don't know, maybe, there's already AIs playing computer games better than humans. So, yeah.
Yeah, my answer is different. Ray Kurzweil tells me 2040. So I'll go with that.
All right. Yeah, I mean, we get a bit sentimental when we see, you know, when you watch movies in the future on what life will be like, how AI will change our lives entirely. But also, you have to admit there's a lot of things that we do today that we don't realize are possible because of AI, right? I mean, even very small things that we take for granted are made possible via AI, right? So, well, like you mentioned, this is narrow AI, right? Are there more levels? So maybe you can just mention that quickly before we get into talking more about, you know, Utu. You know, that level of this narrow AI. Are there more levels that we can expect AI will evolve?
Yeah. Okay. So traditionally, there's really just these two things: artificial general intelligence and artificial intelligence, where the latter is implied to be narrow AI. It just means not human level AI in the sense that it's not conscious and not like a sentient conscious being that has agency of itself. I mean, of course, you can take some algorithm and give it some agency in the sense that you connect it to the internet and you give it the capability to transact in certain ways, and then depending on what you exactly build, it will do autonomously transactions, trying maybe even to fulfill some goal. So from the outside, it might look like, okay, there's some autonomous intelligence acting there. But yeah, it's still just code. It's just code. It still doesn't feel or doesn't think consciously about things, and that's really, I think, the where the traditional boundary between narrow AI and general AI is. But
you have people like Ben Goertzel, though, working on AGI and plenty of others. Like
yeah, of course they are working on it, but nobody has really cracked it yet. And even Sophia, the Ben Goertzel's robot, is still sort of scripted, or it has domain-specific knowledge that, it's just not that general yet. So, I mean, the thing is also whether you are actually looking at how something really works inside, or whether you are just looking at how something acts or appears to the outside. Does it make a difference whether something just simulates AI perfectly or actually is really intelligent? So some people, I mean, the pragmatists tend to say it doesn't really matter, because as long as it acts as if it was intelligence, then why should I care? What's the difference? But in that sense, I guess I'm less of a pragmatist. For me, it does make a difference, I think, whether something actually has a consciousness or, is a character, so to speak, in that sense.
We call Bastian our chief hair splitter.
Sure.
All right. I think because of time, I think let's just move on. We have a few questions. Maybe we'll take them at the end. So maybe I could ask Jason this question. I mean, you're obviously in the crypto space, and you see how things are evolving right now. DeFi, we have DeFi frenzy and what's happening in that space. Maybe you can tell us about what's happening in this space and how trust is becoming a real issue in the DeFi ecosystem.
Sure, I'll make some general comments, but then I'll let Bastian jump in as well. I think everybody is right to get excited about DeFi. I don't think DeFi is the end of the road. It's not like all of the evolution of this technology stops here. I think for Utu, we've been thinking about like, how do we enable DeFi, but how do we also go beyond DeFi, right? DeFi has limitations. It's pretty much only relevant to a really small section of people. If you have, say, 150% collateral to work with, and you don't mind this or that interest rate and this or that instability. So there's room for that space to transform. I mean, it's threatening traditional financial systems tremendously, right? We've been giving our money to banks, letting them loan it out, take the majority of the profit and give us. DeFi is basically turning that around and said, no, you take the majority and we take the crumbs as the platform, right? We can do this in a trustless way. Our comment or our theory is that, you can do this in a trustless way and it's only relevant for a small group of people, or we can add a trust layer to it and bring the transaction costs down, improve the interest rates, bring the collateralization requirements down, and make DeFi something that is accessible and valuable and viable as a financing alternative to just about anybody. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that's true. I think DeFi right now is sort of, apart from cryptocurrencies themselves, probably the first sort of killer app for blockchains, at least for a certain audience. But it has been said like a couple of years ago, 2017, 18, when there was the big blockchain boom, that, okay, this is just the early days of blockchain and it's like internet 1993. So if we use that analogy, then DeFi is maybe like the first online shops coming online on the internet and getting popular. The beginnings of e-commerce, that was maybe like 1995 or 6. And I see it the same way. So DeFi definitely, I mean, it's very fascinating if you try it out. It's pretty cool what you can do and how seamless it all is. And you don't need to, create a lot of accounts. You just need to install a wallet like MetaMask and create one account. And once you have done that, you can basically go to any DApp and just interact there. And it's just, it definitely feels differently from anything before. Before, when you wanted to use a couple of providers, different providers, you need to create accounts everywhere. Can your one account interact with the other account? Well, it depends if they built an integration or not. Probably not. And if not, then you have to export stuff and import stuff there and whatever. And it's very tedious. And DeFi really gives you a feeling that, okay, if you have like an ecosystem of DApps, then you create one account and you can seamlessly interact, and it's all extremely seamless and nice and cool. And I think that's just showing where this whole ecosystem can go when more use cases are also integrated. So one thing is making DeFi itself more flexible, as Jason mentioned. being able to lend money for some investment and not just for collateralization, so that you can do some arbitrage or whatever financial games you are playing, but actually do some, lend some money for if you don't have already a lot of assets and do something with it. That's one thing. But then I think blockchain itself just has a lot of potential beyond DeFi. I mean, all these use cases that have already been promised a few years ago, but which have been, say, slow to really emerge. There are a lot of D-apps in the meantime. Mostly it was about gambling and stuff like this. But there are, the harder use cases are things like supply chain management, or things that we are doing, like with the verifiability for algorithms or things like that. And we are only really just seeing the very beginning of that. And DeFi is really cool in the sense that also, it really pushes the tools for developing D-apps, and now we'll also push the tools for integrating oracles and other sources of information, and all that will be very useful for building all these other use cases as well.
All right. Thanks for that breakdown. Maybe I could ask, can you talk about you recently launched the Utu token? Can you briefly talk about it? Why launch the token in the first place, and how it will change this whole idea of trust on the internet?
Sure. Maybe I'll start and let Bastian jump in. So like I was saying earlier, the main theory behind the token was addressing this third major flaw in digital trust that I mentioned around the misalignment of incentives. So you can think of, there's actually a very simple sentence that kind of sums up the entire approach to our blockchain and to our token model, which is get money out of trust. And I mean that both ways you could interpret it. Like, you shouldn't be able to buy in, but you should be able to earn from good behavior in the system, right? And so we set up our system in such a way to affect this by creating a two-token model. So there's a utility token, which is not buyable, right? You can't go anywhere and buy it. That's not what, it's not going to be sold in a token sale.
That's the trust token.
Right, this is our utility, right? Sorry?
No, that's the trust token.
Sorry, naming disagreements, but essentially this, you can't buy it. You have to earn it, right? By participating in the ecosystem correctly. By sharing data earns you these tokens, and then you can use them to make endorsements on service providers. So you could endorse this service provider with 20 tokens or 100 tokens, whatever you want. And that endorsement, when it's shown according to our algorithms to this person or that person, probably from within your network or somewhat like you, and they maybe they see your endorsement and they decide to hire that person, and they have a really great experience and they also endorse them. There's a role that you played in facilitating that great transaction for those two people. And so there's actually a token reward that's paid out to you. Now, to prevent people from spraying endorsements and all over the place, there's also token penalties where you might lose some of your tokens if you endorse a service provider that really rips somebody off, somebody disapproves of their service after seeing your endorsement. So try to balance basically the incentives to make sure people are only providing good, honest endorsements, which is compounded by the fact that you're really only going to be shown, your endorsements might only be shown to people from generally within your network. So it's your friends and family that you're going to be hurting if you actually make false endorsements or scam endorsements. And so there's kind of an economic and an intrinsic protection to the integrity of our system. Okay, it doesn't explain how you make money. It explains how you don't buy in, but how do you make money? So this token is basically one-way convertible to our cryptocurrency. And the idea is that as you do earn tokens in the system, as you do become more trusted, that can pay off and you can trade that out.
All right.
Sorry?
Yes, go ahead, Bastian. You have something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say, okay, the confusion around the naming is that, well, we are calling, I mean, what Jason just called cryptocurrency our monetarian token, but it's really a utility token in the sense of utility tokens versus securities, which is an important distinction, particularly when you are selling stuff. And yeah, in that sense, the trust token actually is the one that really has the utility in our system. So that's where this naming confusion comes from. But because utility token is already claimed by definition for this other kind of token, we are calling the trust token, and the Utu coin, it's called, is the utility token in that sense. So just to clarify that.
Now that that's clear.
Yeah. And
All
then,
right.
yeah, okay. Maybe leave it there.
All right.
Like I said,
Great.
chief hair splitter.
Definitely.
Now it's also about commonly used definitions and stuff. So, yeah.
All right. Now, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.